It's no secret we use Anchor for this podcast, and we love it. So listen, Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. Anchor has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll also distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more places. And you can easily make money from your podcast. No minimum listenership for sponsorships. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm now to get started.
Sometimes they'll put out these writing prompts for people just to get more submissions and stuff.
Yeah.
And when somebody said, write a story using this source material, and there's a link to the glossary of professional wrestling terms on Wikipedia. And if you go to that, it's an amazing list, alphabetical list of wrestling terms. And I ended up writing this 4-part poem that the last part of it will come out this month. I'll mention that at the end. But it was so informative, and I learned so much about wrestling just by learning what the words meant. You know? Kayfabe, right?
Oh yeah, kayfabe.
And Memphis style wrestling is heavy on the kayfabe.
Right.
I didn't know that.
All of it's supposed to be heavy on the kayfabe, but not anymore, really.
How do you spell that?
Keep it heavy.
Kayfabe.
Yeah. I wanted to call it kayfabe or something,
right.
But it's no, it's just kayfabe.
It's just kind of
what's the etymology there?
It's a meaningless carnival word, is what I've read about it or heard about it. Just to protect the business originally, which
it's about committing to the lie. You know what I mean? It's or committing to the act. It's no, I really.
Yeah.
It's not to the outside world. You don't let it. You treat it like it's serious to everybody, and only only insiders understand how it really works. Right? Does that make sense?
That's part of it, but it's also a word that you use. For instance, if you're in an arena. Mm-hmm. Your opponent's somehow nearby. You might be talking about the match, and suddenly, there's some fans, or in wrestling, they call them marks. Usually, they walk in. It's kayfabe, and then everybody just disperses to protect what's happening.
Okay.
It has a lot lot of different usages.
So it can just be a warning signal too.
It can be a warning
just a weird
signal.
word that you don't. Nobody else would know this, but we know it.
Yeah,
now our audience knows it.
I remember traveling with certain veterans and
trying to pull back the curtain.
Their wife would be calling on the way home from the trip, and it'd be nah, I'm going to kayfabe that call.
That's awesome.
Because they didn't want to talk to their wife at that particular moment, so they kayfabed the call.
So it
becomes
a
verb. Yeah, it's cool. That didn't really happen because I kayfabed it. so there's so many usages of it that it's hard to just.
Cool, man. So it's like a mulligan that transcends the time-space continuum into whatever you want it to be. It's this opportunity to just be I'm not accountable.
It could be that, yeah. It could be that.
Sounds like it can be a lot of things.
Well, I think wrestling is losing its definition, so I start being a little bit more absolutist about things. So some of these things the definitions are being expanded. Everybody's using the word performance art now just to make excuses for stuff not relating to the past, I think. And the problem with that is, it's
very postmodernist.
Where's the concept of your performance art? Did you write a treatise about it? I mean, where is your aesthetic criterion for what you're doing if you're going to call it performance art? Mm-hmm. I mean, don't use that as a blanket term to make an excuse for not really making it into look like a legit bout that people are believing in anymore.
Yeah, just because it's art doesn't mean it's bad wrestling, or it is bad wrestling. It's not art.
Right. I mean, it's cosplay and things like that are kind of getting in the mix now. So
interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. This being the Art Fight podcast, I think I literally was writing a thing about this the other day and mentioned the fact that one of the things that's happening in the world of art, of course, right now is also that all those boundaries between fine art and craft and design and all that stuff, they're all just they're dissolved. I mean, they're not even dissolving. They're totally dissolved. And there's something fun about that, and there's interesting opportunities that come with that. But then there's also what's the standard?
Sure. Yeah.
And I think we have to once the standards are gone, I yearn for the standard a little bit.
Yeah. Once the definitions are expanded so far to include everything, then how can anything be defined?
It's ultimately it's the always recurring modernism versus postmodernism dilemma, and the cultural snake eating itself, as one of my favorite non-philosophers, Mr. Regular of Regular Car Reviews, talked about when he was reviewing the PT Cruiser, and he was talking about
he ended up on the Ouroboros.
Yeah, exactly. But it really is that, and I think that we are in a time like where. How does anything mean anything anymore? Also, because of that, and that's the problem. Is how do you assign? It's not just about the problem of perception and how do I categorize this or give merit to this or whatever. But it's like, how does this? How do I even derive meaning out of something that seems so momentary? Or is it flippant? Or is it born of discipline? Or is it just a reaction? And what is valid and what is not?
Well, some of the old monks would say that you can't really prove meaning in the world, but you can prove your intention to create meaning by your actions. That's an idea. It's like, okay, maybe love doesn't exist, but I'm still going to try to create the concept of it according to definitions that I have and definitions other people have.
Aspirational on some level, yeah.
So it's intentionalism. This is a great wrestling discussion.
Yeah. So obviously we should do the sort of the bread and butter stuff here real quick. So maybe you can tell the audience
who is this guy?
Who the fuck is this guy? And what the fuck is he talking about? And why the fuck is he on this podcast?
Well, I'm a professional wrestler, Jocephus, real name Joseph. I won't reveal my last name, although you can find it on the internet, I'm sure. I've been wrestling almost 10 years now. Started late in life. I was 32 when I had my first match. Now I'm 42.
Nice.
I work for the National Wrestling Alliance with Billy Corgan and Dave Lagana and some other fine, outstanding wrestlers.
Dave is like the number 2 guy, right?
Yeah, Dave is the vice president, and I do a lot of work with him, editing-wise, and behind the scenes with him as well. So, good times there. That's the main company I work for right now. Every now and again, I'll do like a spot show here and there.
Is it like this is an interesting thing too, because we're talking about like boundaries and like who does what, but is it common in a wrestling promotion like that for the wrestlers to also have roles behind the scenes?
I would say no, usually. You see people migrate into those roles, but I've always been interested in behind the scenes stuff. I've always been interested in video and editing and just writing creative things and writing scripts. And I got into wrestling because I was writing a script about it with my brother, actually. And
like about a wrestler?
Yeah, sort of a story about a wrestler or a guy who becomes a wrestler because his mother gets sick, and the deacon at his church convinces him, "Hey, man, we can get you a few $100 a week," which was a very high amount because wrestlers don't always make a few $100 a week. And he's going to help pay for medical bills, this, that, and the other. So my brother and I were writing the script, and it was like, okay, well, one of us should network with the local shows.
To learn about it.
Yeah, to learn about that. And I think he went to one show with me. That was it. He was like, okay, I got this. Because my brother's an introverted guy. I mean, he's a painter. We played music together, things like that. Very creative guy. But I kept with it. I kept going to the shows. I would go to the fairgrounds. I'd go to downtown Nashville shows. The USWO is what it was called. To do research, network. And then finally I came to the conclusion, one of us should do the training. And of course, my brother was like, I'm not doing that.
I'm not an idiot.
I like this. I like this. Like this is like this new journalistic like commitment to the story. You're like, I'm gonna experience this story to write this story down. Yeah.
That kind of is what it became. It was sort of like Brubaker when Robert Redford sees what it's like to be a prisoner before he becomes the warden. You know, hey, Brubaker.
That's the first Brubaker reference.
I love saying that name.
60+
well,
episodes.
You know, we had Matthew Polly on. Matthew Polly wrote the most comprehensive Bruce Lee autobiography recently, and in his past he had written some MMA related books prior, and what he did was similar in his 30s. Well, he left Ivy League school to go train with Shaolin monks in China, learn Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And wrote a book about that.
Then wrote a book about MMA, decided in his mid-30s, I think he was.
To actually fight,
He ended up training mixed martial arts and took on, I think, a handful of fights. And then, he won. Yeah,
that one. There's one on YouTube where he demonstrates quite a jab and wins the fight.
So I'm a huge fan of that, and I'm also just a huge fan of people that I don't know. We live in this world now where people feel like they're so. I feel like, especially now, people are so quick to assume these shrouds or these identities about, like, I'm going to be this kind of person doing these kinds of things, and I don't know if people realize how massively that pendulum can swing in your life. We're all sitting here in our 40s, like, I've lived a lot of lifetimes now and been a lot of different people. And it's when you see somebody that's 21 that's just out of college, like, I know what I want to do. You just want to be like, even if you do, like, be open to not knowing, or
Well, I actually was training to be a missionary. That's kind of what I was doing out of high school, and then I went to college to go back to the missionary world eventually, and I never did. And then kind of was a librarian after that. And after library world, I became a wrestler. So that's sort of my weird journey.
It was a librarian. There's like no kids brought back late books, but then you were the librarian. They're like, right here. I brought it back early.
It was a weird transition. A lot of librarians were at my first match. I do remember that, looking out in the crowd, and I'm like, wow, that's the library section. So,
and we have some weird people in common in a strange sort of orbit in Nashville that we've never really quite connected, but sort of brushed past each other in these different time periods, I think. But I think that probably one of the people we have in common most notably would be Kellie Hicks, who is in the library, sort of Metro Archives and all that. Was she one of those?
No, she wasn't.
Okay.
I had known her before that. I don't know if Kelly's made it to a match or not.
Okay.
If she hasn't and she's listening to this, she needs to make it to one. That's a dictate.
Do you want to cut a promo right now directed at her that taunts her?
Kellie Hicks, are you ready for the kingdom of Jocephus? If so, please come to one of my matches, and I promise I will give you archival editions of the Muppet magazine. Inside joke. She wasn't. I don't think she was at the first one. I was in a band with her called Lilas. I was in Lilas just for a minute there.
Yeah. Interesting.
I played accordion with them.
That's awesome.
And then, just as typical in Nashville, you're in a band and somehow you don't get the call for the next show. And it's not, as in wrestling, you say there's no heat there, but somehow you don't make it to the list, and then, like, it's never discussed again. Almost every band I've ever been in, that's the situation.
I would suspect, though, as an accordion player, that you're going to be also the most expendable.
Maybe they just didn't want that drony sound anymore. They replaced it with loops. Perhaps,
They're like, God, every time we play with them, we have to be in tune.
Right. Yeah. We better get Ableton. That's probably what they were thinking. But so I started out and worked at the Stadium Inn downtown. That was kind of my exclusive place to work for a good while. I was Jocephus, the Shelby Street Brawler. Because when I was growing up in Nashville, I'm from here, Shelby Street was a rough area. I mean, there were people getting gunned down. I actually did inner city work over there, and there were just all kinds of crazy things happening. And so I kind of connected myself to that. It's halfway based on the Brooklyn Brawler. I don't know if you remember that character.
Yeah,
in WWF.
Yeah.
He was a jobber with a character, essentially. And started with Tony Falk and his son LT Falk. They helped me learn the basics. And then after that, an old Memphis legend called Dirty Dutch Mantell took over and started a school, and I was one of his original students in that school.
That's cool. I love all these names, man.
Yeah, and Dutch is, for instance, I'll give you a background on Dutch. He worked in Memphis, but he was always kind of a mentor to people. He's the guy that told Steve Austin to go by the name Steve Austin. Because he wanted to go by the name Steve Williams, and there was already a wrestler named Dr. Death, Steve Williams. He said, you should go by Steve Austin. And he listened to him, and he mentored Stone Cold before Stone Cold was Stone Cold. He helped The Undertaker develop a lot of his wrestling psychology. He helped Kane do the same thing.
What do you mean by wrestling psychology?
Meaning, how do you break down a match? I mean, there's certain elements of a match. When does the good guy babyface, when does he finally come back at the end? Mm-hmm. Are you listening to the crowd? Do they help you know that it's time to take it home, as you would say in wrestling? Uh-huh. When does the heel bad guy, when does he apply his pressure on the babyface to get the sympathy from the crowd so that they can live vicariously through the good guy and get emotionally involved? Things like that.
Yeah, cool.
How do you do things? How do you book a show? Dutch is like a master of psychology.
He's like the Joseph Campbell of wrestling.
He's one of them for sure from the old school, because he was another guy that cared about what was happening behind the scenes. Not necessarily the editing and videoing as much, but just like how's a show run? And he worked with Jerry Jarrett and all these other people.
Is that part of why you have that consciousness about that and you have that interest in that part of it, you think, is because you came up under a mentor who emphasized that more?
That definitely fed it. I think I wanted to know that anyway to kind of translate into the screenplay I was writing.
Oh,
You kind of came from the outside.
Yeah, you were coming to that. You were
that
coming
way.
from there anyway. Yeah, that's cool.
But I traveled with Dutch almost, I'd say, 2-3 weekends out of a month for about 2 years. And so he would constantly talk about, oh, this is what I did. He did a lot of stuff in Puerto Rico. This was at the show I booked with Bushwhacker Luke in Puerto Rico. We'd meet every morning. We meet on Saturday morning at Denny's.
I'm just so glad I'm here for that sentence, man.
Yeah. Hey, I actually wrestled Bushwhacker Luke and choke slammed him.
It's that's like a Tom Waits song, man. But Bushwhacker Luke in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, you gotta get that low tone. Get that Howlin' Wolf vibe for that one.
Yeah, totally, man. That's awesome. That's really
you
cool.
know what? By the way, when we were at that opening of my thing or whatever, I ran into Jocephus here, and you were there, Joe, obviously, and I learned, and I'd forgotten about this, and I still don't really have an active recollection of it, but I want you to know, Joe, that I have wrestled this man.
I think he told me about that.
Yeah.
Did you tell me about that?
I think I did. You almost forget about it because it didn't last very long. Right there,
it was a brief chat.
Yeah. Hey, so listen, just for the audio, since this is all
just
audio,
to archive it.
let's just set the stage here. I don't have any recollection of this, but what I do know is that I am 5'6", 150 pounds, and you are probably what 6'2", 6'3", about
280.
Yeah, about 280.
Yeah.
So
how tall are you?
6'3"-ish is what I say.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's not like wrestling indulgence either. That's legit.
No, yeah, he's legit tall.
So I don't have any recollection of it. Probably because I was concussed, but it doesn't sound like it went very well. It seems like something. It seems like something where I was like really pressing some buttons or something. I'm not really sure.
Were you married back then?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you weren't, there probably was a reason.
Were you like...
Well, that was my first wife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So.
Have to look at the timeline.
Yeah, right. Do you remember what you did to me to snuff me out? Or
what did you do to yourself to find yourself in a situation where you somehow attacked this giant man?
Here's the thing. I'm just happy. I just love the fact that we have a podcast where we can relearn what happened in violent things that we encountered in real life that we don't recall. This is really fun.
But you don't recall it because you were so impaired before you attacked Jocephus?
I'm kind of thinking that that's possible.
Well, it's just what happened to me a lot when I started training is you tell people that and they're like, you should wrestle me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let's do this.
You're like, okay, tiny Jewish looking man.
I mean, but to be honest, I wasn't this big at that point. I was probably like 250.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, this is totally doable.
This is still triple digits above Brian.
There was a musician, I won't name him, but he doesn't live in Nashville anymore, but he's still probably connected to Nashville people. Once I started doing music shows in the 2008 around Tennessee, which was around the same time I started training as well. But this guy tried to steal my shtick, like going from doing gigs and music to wrestling, and he would tell people he was training to be a wrestler.
Huh.
And so...
Was he at all?
No, of course not. He was just trying to talk to women. And so somehow I ended up at a party with this guy and I actually heard him doing the shtick.
Really?
And I tapped him on the shoulder. I was like, "Hey, I heard you're becoming a wrestler." And he was just kind of, like he didn't say anything. I was like, "Well, okay, let's do this." I challenged him
right there.
And I remember he came at me and I just took him and I slammed him against the wall and he crumbled to the ground, but then somehow he got up and wanted some more. And so I made it I grabbed him by the throat at that point.
I'm starting to understand exactly why I don't recall our encounter.
Because, the old school ways, if somebody challenges the business,
let's go.
You go for him. And I wasn't trying to hurt this guy or anything. I wanted to see his wrestling moves.
Right.
Which were nothing.
Yeah.
And of course the girl just kind of, it's like the 80s movie. She was just like, and then walked away.
It reminds me a little bit of stories I've heard about people I know who are veterans who find out someone who's saying they're a veteran isn't actually a veteran.
Right.
And they're not happy about it.
What do they call it? What do they call it? Something valor?
I don't know. I think there is a specific
stolen
name.
valor.
Stolen valor.
Yeah.
Well, it's
you can tell how seriously they're taking it.
Yeah.
I can't even count the people that have told me that they're Jeff Jarrett's cousin here in Tennessee. Oh, I'm old Jeff's cousin. It's like, oh, really? Man, that's a heck of a family tree. It's like a Rorschach painting or something, but or not ink blot, rather, not painting, but you know what I mean. Pollock would be a better example.
So when you were a person that was just getting started, I guess my question, I suppose, is like, in the way that you had a certain period of time where you had this native objectivity about wrestling, right? You had only seen it, watched it, and observed it, researched it, whatever. And then you make the decision to be in it, doing it. And then there's a moment, probably really quickly, where you're like, I'm doing this right now. What was like, how do you look at it differently? Like, because once you cross that sort of gulf, like the perception, you can't really go back to pure objectivity anymore. So I guess I'm just curious about sort of, and especially now with 10 years of, you have a very educated and nuanced historical knowledge, the movement, the language, you're in there. So I guess I'm just curious about like, in terms of when you were on the outside and purely objective versus where you are now, what are the differences perhaps in what you maybe thought about what wrestling was or what was made of? Not necessarily like what surprised you, like, oh, that shit really hurts or whatever.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like more like about the nuances that perhaps people just don't think about.
Well, I think it's kind of like when the person in the story becomes the storyteller, that's sort of the difference. Is I was trying to create my own story by becoming a wrestler, because the reason being is because a lot of bad things had happened in my life. And I thought, okay, I'm going to become a wrestler to do something I normally wouldn't do. Even though I was writing a script about it, I normally wouldn't have done that in order to try to balance my life from all these chaotic elements. Essentially becoming a creator. It's like the book of Genesis talks about all the elements that are crazy and whatever your concept of God is, even if it's nothing in the book, still he brings order to it. I was looking for that order in my life, but now I'm looking to tell the story in the sense of less performing and more behind the scenes stuff. I think I still have the naive concept of what it is and still can appreciate the stuff that I gravitated towards back in the past. Like today I work as a music teacher at SAE actually, and I stopped in and I showed some guys some old Memphis stuff because that's a lot of my favorite wrestling came from Memphis. And still inside I was just like, this is the greatest stuff ever. This is Samuel Beckett in a way.
That's cool.
It's Samuel Beckett meets athleticism. And I still can find the appreciation there. I think just like anything, if you meet some of your heroes, you may despise them in ways. And that's the side that you don't want to have. You don't want to not appreciate somebody's work anymore because you've met them.
Yeah. It's a very common phenomena, though.
Yeah, because
it's not just a cliche.
Because maybe they're putting you through that initiation where if you get past 2 years of brutality, they'll actually become your friend or something.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, though, that's some of the people, and I won't mention names, but my favorite wrestler of all time is Jerry the King Lawler.
Yeah.
And he's always been kind to me from the get-go.
That's great to know, man.
And I wrestled him probably about 12 times.
That's awesome.
And I have something, and
It's like wrestling Miles Davis. If you, yeah.
That's like me like having like a kung fu fight with Coltrane.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And the cool thing is I have something he signed for me after a match once. And, people don't like to talk about this stuff, but he's still my hero. Uh-huh. It says, "Thank you for the great match, Jocephus."
Oh, my
Jerry
gosh.
Law. I mean, that's like the greatest possession in wrestling that I have.
Yeah, that's
from
incredible.
my hero, dude.
See, and that's one of those things too, where it codifies your experience in such a way that it liberates you from a lot of the painful aspects of aspiring towards something that's kind of this apparition that you're sorting out, right? Because now that you've had that accomplishment, it's kind of like, even if I don't do anything else in my whole life, right? Like you've got that, like that is to go from like what is completely unimaginable as a kid, or or whatever, to being in that reality. Yeah. Honestly, everything else is gravy at this point. So it takes the impetus of ego and pressure and further accomplishment or compounding this sort of momentum. It's like everything's just gravy, And also it actually highlights also, by the way, that people that are really good at stuff, that are famous for doing it, don't have to be dicks for the sake of just being a dick.
Exactly.
Like some gatekeeper system or whatever.
Yeah. I want to like follow up on like your whole process here. So like, I feel like I write a lot of stuff about art, and I also have my own experience with my own creative processes, with my own practices, right? And not every person who writes art criticism actually understands what that thing actually is in their own terms. You know? I don't think that means you can't be an art critic, but I do think it gives me a special perspective. So like, how has actually going through what you've actually gone through helped you? What have you learned that's helping with your screenplay as a result? Like, what are the results of actually committing to this research?
I think a lot of it is like writing a travel guide if you've never been to the location. I think that's,
world building.
Yeah, like I've been to the location now, so I could write the travel guide and say, as I stood on the steps or as I've been in the ring at this point, I can talk to you about my experience. And I think this experience as whatever you want to call them, the fan, the layperson,
the mark.
I'm not a big fan of that word, but that is what
predatory.
people say. Yeah.
Or manipulative on some level.
But, just because I know that everything in reality is customer service.
Right.
If you're going to have fans,
well said.
you can't just treat them like you're above them.
Yeah. It's a
no
very
matter
disconnected assertion. Yeah.
It's different if they're attacking you and you're, I had somebody attack my kid once online. I was just like, don't enter this world. But yeah, I think a lot of people want to act like they understand everything about the wrestling business, but they're still writing the travel guide to a land that they don't understand, to the Atlantis or to whatever, some mythical land that seems shiny to them.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, I think, like we were talking about, like with the like the new journalists or whatever, I feel like, some like writers have been willing to like get in the ring to some degree, or there's a guy, Bill Plimpton, like joined the Detroit Lions for a season. I grew up in Detroit, so that was always a book I was aware of. And actually played in like an exhibition game during preseason or something like this. Like did like 4 downs or something like that. And that's a huge amount of like exposing yourself to this thing that most people aren't really willing to do.
Right.
And I think there's something interesting about it. To me, I just think that's the thing that's interesting about being somebody creating something from something. It's like, well, if you think it's so interesting, why wouldn't you just get in there and do it? You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of times people will do it for one day. Like, oh, I got in the ring last night and I took some bumps. It's like, but are you doing that 5 nights a week?
Yeah.
I mean, my first 2-3 years, I did 3 to 5 nights a week.
You
And I was
actually doing shows, you mean?
Yeah. I'd do Evansville. I'd do all these other these cities that were 2-3 hours away at first, and then you lead into the bigger bookings.
So when you would do that, would you like just leave Nashville on a Thursday and just be gone till Sunday night or something like that?
No, I would. A lot of times you'd come back
just
to
run out
Nashville
and
the
come
same
back.
night.
I see.
So you'd do like a loop. Mm-hmm. You'd create these loops, and then you'd do them every week. Mm-hmm. But see, that's the difference between doing that and dealing with the travel and this, that, and the other than the guy at the convention who gets in the ring and the wrestler beats him up for 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. It's not the same. Mm-hmm. You know, I've almost, my neck still is messed up from 2013.
Oh, no.
Even though I just do acupuncture and stuff for that. But it's just like, if you're dealing with a nagging injury that comes from something like this, then it creates a different perspective as well, as opposed to I'm the Instagram hero because my hero clotheslined me once. You know, it's a different world.
What about? So did that come from that move?
It came from a Death Valley driver.
And what is that?
It's basically somebody gets you on their shoulders. Your head is tucked in under their arm, so you're looking. I was looking down at the mat, and then they just kind of flip you over, and you're supposed to land.
Oh, okay, yeah.
On your back, like your shoulder blades almost, but my head just got spiked.
Oh, okay.
And my body went one way, and like my head kind of went the other way. But I immediately stood up and walked out of the ring, like out of shock.
Oh, wow.
But I had a disconnect between my head and my body for a little bit.
Whoa.
Yeah, that was sort of like the injury that I won't say it did me in because I've wrestled since. That's 6 years ago. But it came back in around 2016, and I was just like, well, I don't know.
Oh, like the injury flared up again?
Yeah, it came. I mean, it just came back to me.
And that's the thing that people don't realize. You know, if any wrestler has a absolute insane litany of punishment that they can catalog of all the things that they've done to themselves. And so when people are like, well, I don't know, man, that seems fake. It's like, oh man, how real is it for the people that do it, you know?
Well, here's the last injury I had is maybe the scariest one, really. I was at the fairgrounds wrestling, and I did the spot, as they call them in wrestling, when you have a couple of things you're doing with your opponent. And I got up on the second rope. I was going to superplex the guy down into the mat. And the spot was he pushes me, and I land on my feet, and then I turn around, and he jumps on me and does what you call a crossbody. Well, he pushes me, and I don't land on my feet. Instead, I fall on my back, and my head hit the mat like 7-8 times in a row. So at that point, I'm knocked out, but I still had a match after that. And then had a second match because that match I was in led into a tag team match. And I for 15, 20 minutes, I have no recollection of that time.
Oh, no.
But I still did it without even knowing. And I came to in the locker room, and I was like, what the heck just happened?
Wow.
They're like, what do you mean? That nobody knew that I had knocked myself out.
Oh, my God.
But somehow I still participated. And that
Sounds like, to me, kind of like what happened in the encounter that we had.
Maybe so.
I think we figured it out.
Yeah. And you say you were married at that time? Okay. But yeah, that was a year ago, so I've been selective on my matches. And most of them have been NWA matches since then, like David Arquette and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, so like tell people about this. Okay, so you had a hair versus hair match. And so, actually before we even get into I'd love to get to that, but you have gone through a bit of a renaissance over the last, this started what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
It was longer ago than that, but we can, I can explain that.
Yeah. Why don't I stop paraphrasing it terribly and misrepresenting the time frames? But ultimately, you've been on a path and then had sort of an awakening, and then that has manifested into some other things here.
Well, around 2012, I started wrestling in Chicago for a show that Billy Corgan was running. That's actually when I first got to meet him. And I got on that show through the wrestler named Raven. Do you remember that guy? Quote the Raven, nevermore.
Oh, yeah.
Which was another one of my mentors for a year or two. And he was another one of my favorites. So I did all this work with him. Anyway, around that time, I was still doing the gimmick of Bruiser Brody because his widow had said that she liked what I was doing. So,
So you took over the identity of a wrestler who'd passed away.
Yeah, because if you look at pictures of him, I look almost just like the guy.
I love that idea.
And I know guys that knew him, and actually Dutch Mantell was with him and rode to the show with him the day that he got murdered in Puerto Rico.
Oh my God.
Which you can see all that stuff on Dark Side of the Ring by Viceland, which is a pretty awesome series that I portrayed Bruiser Brody on just this past year.
Yeah.
How you like them? How you like that little plug there?
Yeah.
So I was doing the Brody character, and I remember one night Billy came up to me, and he was like, I feel like you're right here. And he held his hand up as like a measuring thing. He's like, but I feel like you could be up here. And obviously raised his hand higher in regards to my character. And I said, okay, let's talk about this. And he said, do you know who Father Yod is? And I was like, I've heard that name. He's like, yeah, he was the head of the band Yehovah 13. He started a health food restaurant. It was the Source family.
Oh, the Source family, yeah.
Yeah, and he was like, look him up right now. Too. And I said, okay, I'll do that later. He's like, no, do it now. And so I didn't have I had a flip phone. I was like, I can't do this.
I need more equipment.
And yeah, so he looked it up and showed me a picture of Father Yod. And at that point, with all my beard and hair, I kind of had a resemblance to Yod. Mm-hmm. And so he and I started basing my character more on Father Yod, and that was 2013 is when we started doing that. I started
like a new age cult leader,
sort of like that. And we did all kinds of cool stuff. I wish a lot of it was available, but it's like Billy would write a loop or write some music, and then one of his guitarists from the Pumpkins at that point, Jeff Schroeder, would play along with it, and then I would just improvise a song, almost like Jim Morrison, kind of like singing the end, and it lasts 30 minutes.
Like an American Prayer type of, yeah.
But we would be doing that at the beginning of the show, and of course people didn't know what the heck was going on.
Perfect.
And I'd get out of the ring and just yell in their faces and do all kinds of cool stuff like that. So really that was the start of dropping. I was Jocephus Brody, because I was, based off of Bruiser Brody. That's when I dropped the name Brody at that point, which always, like Dutch Mantell, the mentor.
This is how John Mellencamp's transitioned from Johnny Cougar.
Absolutely.
It's exactly the same. He's like, I'm going to drop this name a piece at a time.
Yeah.
And eventually I'll just be John Mellencamp again.
Perfect correlation there. But Dutch always was in favor of the Brody character, so he even still calls me Brody if I tell, hey Brody, what you doing?
That's awesome.
But it's still
It's familial. It's familial.
Yeah, he'll be like, I feel like you should get back to that Brody thing. Like, I don't have any hair at this point, man. I mean, I have hair, but I'm going for more of a Michael Landon hair vibe. That's kind of my goal.
Werewolf, right?
Yeah, totally. So I had the awakening. My wife at the time became my first follower. And basically to show that she was my follower, I would power bomb her on somebody. You know what a power bomb is?
No.
So basically you just get somebody above your head and just drop them on somebody else. So that would be like one of my finishing moves, was just to power bomb her on somebody.
So literally drop your wife on one of your opponents.
And you're teasing me about my first failed marriage.
Well, I do remember on one of those shows I had to beat her with a cane.
Oh my God.
And you got to do it for the crowd. So the first hit brought tears to her eyes. I'll never forget that. It's almost like they shot out. So yeah, definitely contributed to the marriage not working out.
Well,
But she was a wrestler too, right? Am I right?
She had probably 30 or so matches, but she preferred to be more of, as they say, a valet who would rough somebody up and then toss them back into the ring for me to finish off.
Oh, okay, so that's the valet is like the female accompaniment for the male wrestler, right?
Yeah.
But who would also get involved in the act and do some physical stuff.
Yeah, they could, or they could just be like Miss Elizabeth. She got involved in the act a few times, but most of the time she helped Macho Man get sympathy or get heat sometimes from what he was doing. But she was My ex-wife's a power lifter, just super strong, so she could legit beat up a lot of these little guys, kind of like Brian, who
Thank you.
put trunks on.
She could legitimately beat up on his
We
feet.
did a video for this guy named Patrick Sweeney. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I know who he is. Yeah,
And we did a video, and Chris Crofton was in it.
Yeah.
And one of her spots in there was to slap him, and she practically broke his jaw.
Did you slap Chris or Patrick?
She slapped Chris.
Oh,
And Chris was messed up pretty badly after that. I was like,
You should put like a mouth guard in.
something. But it's good in the video because they have it in slow-mo when she hits him.
oh my God! I wonder if that's back when Chris was having maybe more fun than he would. Than was good for him at the time.
It could be, but
hopefully it was, because then he probably doesn't remember the pain.
well, he always. I mean, he'd be good in the wrestling business as sort of an old school heel manager.
Oh my
Totally.
God!
He'd be great at that.
But that's why
How do you get him in there?
my ex-wife is like, welcome to the business. Like, can you take a slap from a woman or not? That's a challenge to you, Chris.
Yeah, I had a brief stint where I played drums in the alcohol stunt band.
All right.
Kind of like your Lilas experience.
Yeah. You didn't get the call?
No, I mean, I played with them for about a year. And then I moved to New York for a while. So I have reasons that don't hurt my pride, but still it hurts my pride. I'm
sorry.
No, that was that was the most fun I've ever had playing music in my life, because it was, everything else I had ever done was so serious. And to play with Chris, and you're playing songs about Dickerson Pike or
Right.
That was a good song. Dickerson Pike at Night.
yeah.
I think he took over the Dave Cloud sort of vibe, but not as absurd as Dave. Because
Yeah.
I actually play with Dave as well.
Oh, nice.
Our band name, I can't mention it on here
Sure.
because it was perverse.
Yeah.
So, but we did shows for a year as
Really,
well.
So you were spring watering it up and all that.
Yeah. But I'm always the guy, I don't drink, so I would just go and watch everybody die in front of me. It's just kind of like, okay, well, there's Joseph over there with his Fender Rhodes.
What about are you teaching piano at SAE? Like you said, you're a music teacher, and I didn't know about this.
I actually teach I used to be full time there, so they would put me in different classes, but I do music theory.
Oh wow, that's amazing, man!
So
that's so cool.
We get into a lot of it. We get into programming stuff in Logic, just because a lot of these kids can't play instruments. So hey, program some stuff.
Yeah.
It'll play it right back for you. It's your own orchestra in your pocket, essentially.
Right, and we'll learn about this mode or that mode or this whatever.
As far as we can get. It's only one semester, and it's 15 weeks long.
Oh wow, so that's like a boot camp.
Yeah. I always feel like, I don't know if I can. I don't want to cram stuff, but you kind of have to. Then we get into the number system a little bit. So.
So it seems all these things have to be sort of complementary in some way, like all your different. It seems like a far stretch to say music teacher, writing, script writing, film editing type of things.
I'm just not going to have anybody tell me I can't do something.
Yeah.
There's no compartment in my mind that says like Plato's Republic where I only do one thing. That's just not how I am. It's like, I'll do 25 things and hopefully do them well. I mean, I don't want to be the jack of all trades, good at none, but I'm not going to have that barrier in my head.
I feel like I have a similar problem, but I have a huge sort of residual envy for people like, I always refer to like my friend Jeff Coffin, who, he plays saxophone. Like, it's portable, it's easy. Most people like it, not everybody. It's a saxophone. It has its eras, it comes and goes. But I mean, he makes great money, plays in front of massive crowds, nonstop.
Does a lot of various things within
Teaching,
the world of playing the saxophone.
All the things, but ultimately, like, it all amounts to like I
blow
into this thing that I can carry around in a little case.
Yeah,
that's just. I mean, of course, inside it, there's all these nuances and complexities that are infinite and kaleidoscopic and whatever. But just the point of focus and conversationally, you know what I mean? Just to be able to say like, oh, I play saxophone.
Yeah, and sum it up.
I'm that guy that has been in a lot of strange situations that you wouldn't believe. Like, I'm in GQ magazine. It's like you would never believe that's
how
true.
How did you get in there?
It's through Billy Corgan, but still, like, there's a story.
They did a story about the promotion?
About the promotion, and like the cover, it wasn't on the cover, but the story page is Billy and I. And there I am in GQ.
Yeah.
Can you maybe enlighten the listeners as to just a little bit about the history of the NWA, and because it's a long time now.
Yeah.
So there's a unique, I think, perspective there that, when people think about wrestling, they pretty much only think about, Vince McMahon and whatever the hell he's promoting and making happen. But there's a lot of degrees of other things.
Yeah.
And also things that were kind of borrowed from and not given back to, perhaps.
Right.
But anyway.
Well, technically, if you look at it, the NWA is the oldest wrestling body in the U.S.
Interesting.
It started in 1948.
Tell me what it stands for. National Wrestling Association?
National Wrestling Alliance.
Okay, that's even better. I love it.
So the idea behind it was, you would have all these people, almost like a board that would make decisions on who had the belt. It's, the promoters, essentially. And that stuff would change at varying times. You'd have territories that would, the different wrestlers, if they were getting worn out in one territory, they could go to the other territory.
It was like in a weird way, I think it's interesting that just that alone.
Yeah.
I think it's so fascinating because that is exactly the way that things had to be done in the absence of technology. You had to develop systems that had interrelational elements with some sort of codified structure and agreements and hierarchies.
Yeah.
But with a way that was kind of free flowing, and it wasn't exclusive, but you had to sort of be on you had to have in your locale, you had to have somebody that sat. There was representation from the board for every locale.
Right.
And that was sort of the binding agent. It wasn't just, I don't know, the internet or whatever.
Right. No, I mean, that wasn't even... They did things.
You had a real, actual network.
Yeah. And the wrestling business used to be very protected. It was almost like the mafia in a way. You had to know the language. You had to know how to speak. You had to know how to act. You had to know how to protect it. If somebody questioned it, you had to be a legit fighter usually to be part of it. Otherwise, you couldn't protect it. You go to the local bar and somebody's like, "That stuff's just fake." It's like, oh, then you beat them up. That's how you protected the business, Nowadays, you'd be like, oh, somebody'd say, oh, that stuff's fake. It's like, hey, you want to get a selfie together? I mean, anyway, to get back to the NWA, it was Vince McMahon's father actually was part of the NWA originally, and then he broke off from it to do Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Before it was WWF, it was WWWF. It's hard to even say that. But
Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
It's like I can barely say that. So Vince McMahon Jr., because he's a junior actually, he got the best talent.
By just paying them more and stuff like that, or
I mean, I'm sure that's a
just
big part of it.
Whatever it was.
So because of that, the territories that the NWA established start suffering because all their stars are gone, and some of them lasted longer than others, but a lot of them just closed their doors eventually because of that, and then you don't have territories anymore. And the NWA still existed. It existed. It never really didn't exist. There was just periods where you don't know about it. Like there's sort of just a dark period where it's still there. I mean, I was actually an NWA champ in sort of the period before Billy. I was the NWA Southern champ.
That's awesome.
Which was a legit belt that like Macho Man had at different times.
That's rad.
But that belt isn't recognized by the current NWA. We only have certain belts that are recognized still. Doesn't mean it can't come back one day. It just means that that's not our focus at this point.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it's
so
existed.
How does the Billy Corgan era happen?
The Billy Corgan era happens, he acquires it in 2016. Or was it? No, I'm sorry. I think it was 17 actually is when he really
So was the
acquired
promotion like on the rise and coming back at that point, or was it in a dark era?
It was still sort of in the stagnant dark era. It still had... If you're a wrestling fan, you would still see it and you'd still have it, but I wouldn't say it was in the mainstream at that point.
Sure.
But you get Billy involved and that brings it into a different, all kinds of different realms because he's Billy Corgan.
In this dark period, though, just prior to Billy Corgan coming in, how would someone conventionally consume what was going on? Like, where was it broadcast or not? Where would you source it? Where would you find it? How would you participate? Was it only live? Was it?
That's the problem with it. It didn't really have the organization as it did in the old days. Mm-hmm. Like, there'd be people in different states that would have an NWA show, and they may recognize a world champion still, but then they'd have too many belts,
And disconnected because there wasn't any governance.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm the Southern champion, where am I really going to defend that?
Yeah.
I never left the city of Millersville, Tennessee when I was the Southern champion with the belt. Mm-hmm. The idea of the NWA belts is really that you defend them all over the world if possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially if you're the world champion, you're going to Japan, and we've actually, our champ has gone to China and things like that and defended the belt.
That's awesome.
He's defended it in England and all kinds of stuff.
How fun.
Yeah.
Isn't China like where they have like just crazy ass wrestling with like giant inflatable weird ass
I've seen
3-story tall fucking things, and
I really didn't want to see where that was located, though.
I just assume anything I don't understand is probably in China.
No, I mean, there was great. It was in some kind of arena. It was a big show over there.
Yeah, Mark. We got to check with Mark Ramundi on this because he's the wrestling aficionado.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. But anyhow, So Billy comes in, and then New Life, GQ magazine.
That was before NWA. Then I was in GQ. But
right.
I've traveled around in various parts of America with Billy on RV trips. I've done 2 of them with him.
Nice.
Just like he would go to do a writing trip and just kind of tap into the fan base that he has and things like that. And some of that would be wrestling cultivation as well. And Dave Lagana was on one of them as well.
Did you call it a writing trip?
Yeah, like we'd drive through America and then...
he'd be writing songs? Is that what you mean? Oh,
yeah,
wow,
exactly.
That's cool. So that's like what he does. He goes and travels, and that's another album, maybe.
Well, at least for 2 records.
That's interesting to know, yeah. And then in the meantime, let's promote the wrestling a little bit, too.
Or let's figure out what the wrestling's going to be, so to speak.
Like planning.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But currently, we're going to do studio tapings in Atlanta at the end of September and early October to try to get back into that studio vibe,
That's like I don't know I don't know why, but that brings it home for me. Like, that makes it resonate. The idea that the network is going to be happening again, and the idea that the local taping will be happening again in some way. Right. There's something about, because I don't know, like when things are so big and everything's just like a mega event, like how do you cultivate? I don't have any. I'm not exposed enough to the other things that are going on. I just feel like, there's just another WrestleMania or whatever the fuck. But this is something that just feels grassroots, but in a highly produced and interesting and well put together way. And also for people that they're kind of maybe older, that aren't perhaps in the original kind of maybe demographic of what a lot of people think wrestling is for. This is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's not taking itself too seriously, but at the same time, it takes itself very seriously.
Yeah. I think one of the things, like, again, as a Generation Xer, the thing that I liked about that era of wrestling, and that sort of turned me off when the next era came, was the era that we were in. Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior, name the Pantheon,
the great Kabuki.
I ended up, I love that stuff because it was such a great, like, comic book, basically, and it was so fun, and these guys were such crazy, outrageous characters, but it was so well done, and like fucking Roddy Piper, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then later on, like, it became so like twisted and extreme, and like it lost that sense of humor, it lost the sort of the hero sort of thing and the villain thing. It lost that attitude. And a lot of what I've seen of, like, on the videos on YouTube and stuff, and some of the things we've talked about that you have coming up, I mean, a lot of that stuff feels more like that old vibe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that we have to move backwards or something, but I like the fun aspect of wrestling a lot. You know what I mean? And this is very entertaining, and it's a lot of fun. Really cool characters and stuff.
Right. And I think a lot of times people think if a character is cartoony, their matches may not be good. There's like this weird kind of thing about, well, that's just a bunch of cartoons. It's like, yeah, but listen to the crowd and see what they're into at that point before everybody was smart about everything, as they say.
The other thing I liked about that era was...
Well, that's the wrestling term, that they're smart to the business. They're smart to how it works.
I see what you mean.
You know, and obviously everybody is now. But can you still enjoy it, even though it is what it is now?
Well, one of the things I enjoy about it, and it's the same thing I enjoy about combat sports, is like the fact that it's like all these cartoony characters and stuff that we're talking about, the villain and the good guy, and the way that they were sort of blown up and bigger than life in the 80s like that. You know, the costumes and everything. Like, there's nothing almost sillier than the fucking Ultimate Warrior. But when he gets in the ring, he is a fucking insane athlete. You know what I mean? And those guys were all insane athletes. And that's the other thing I loved about it was... this shit's crazy.
Right. It is.
Watching these huge people do this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Flying, man.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of flyers. Heck, I used to go off the top ropes myself. I regret every second of doing that.
Well, I love this fold you're kind of talking about, where it's sort of like, it used to be that people had to sort of suspend, the burden was on the audience to suspend their disbelief. Now, it's different. It's actually a welcome invitation to the audience to imagine with and to be a part of. It's not this. It doesn't have this precept of assumed like duplicity about it or something. Does that make sense? Like it's just kind of like, so come along for the ride. This is fucking awesome.
Well, it's like anything, a movie, a play, or whatever. If you can get people emotionally invested, they'll put aside the fact that it may not be real. You know, I mean. And I think we have to get, as wrestlers or whatever you want to say, writers in the wrestling world, bookers, we have to make it seem real now to get the audience back. And maybe there's a chance for it to be like it was back in the day. I feel like Walt Disney talking right now. Maybe one day, if we put our imaginations together.
If we all freeze our heads.
Right.
That's, obviously, that's a huge part of it. You know, you are in a situation where, I mean, any professional combat fighter is in any situation, but certainly in the wrestling world, it's, you know, a great deal of it is that your capacity for performing a character, you know what I mean? And entertaining a crowd.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these training centers, they should have acting classes. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but it just sounds like
exactly right.
Everybody should be a thespian down there.
Have you done any acting training or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of stuff, and
because your thing, I've noticed, like with your promos. And by the way, anybody listening, please just. I don't know how the fuck to tell people to find this stuff, but just
type in Kingdom of Jocephus on YouTube and you'll find me.
Please, everyone, join the Kingdom of Jocephus, because. We haven't really I really want to explore the awakening a little bit more, because I find this to be endlessly fascinating, and I can't help but also to think that, because I feel like the thing that people miss is that they see people see these characters and these caricatures and these sort of exaggerated forms of people, or at least when I was growing up, it was like, oh, that's you know, now that would be so perceptibly racist that it could never happen, but actually back then it really worked or whatever. But I guess my point is just that everything comes from some truth. Everything is some sort of a projection. Whatever you're sourcing and whatever you're doing and however you're portraying, there's something real and authentic, because no one can just switch a gear and become something that they don't identify with, and they can't primordially sort of in a real natively invested way sort of project. So that is what I want to press on, that nobody's going to ask you about, which is in terms of this awakening, how does that parallel your actual experience, and where's the connective tissue between the actualities of daily life and this enlightenment period. And by the way, I did he got suspended also because he smashed a guy with a ladder.
Oh, I saw that on the video.
Oh,
yeah.
Did I?
So when you say this awakening, is that what you keep saying, the word awakening?
A period of enlightenment.
Enlightenment. So just so the audience is clear on this, you're talking about when Brody became Jocephus, right?
It's probably, I became Jocephus more so before the NWA stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Initially.
So when is the enlightening? When does that occur in your timeline?
That would just be the beginnings of my NWA promos, which would be like
cool.
2017, maybe 2018.
And so that was what introduced you to the NWA.
Right.
It's a little Koreshian. It's a little.
Is it?
Koreshian. That's a great way of putting it.
It's like
the Jocephus name, like this Old Testament name, does give it this sort of like Koreshian sort of vibe. But the character himself is much more Source family.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
What was the people that had the purple capes and the sneakers?
That was the
Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate. Yeah.
A little bit of that vibe.
Is it?
This guy, your bald spiritual advisor is a little bit like
spiritual
Doe. It's
advisor.
like Doe and Ray, right? The two leaders, Doe and Ray.
Give us the anatomy of your enlightenment and what this really means and how it relates to actual you.
Well, essentially, in college, I was a religion major.
Yep.
And a music major.
Where were you at school?
At that point, I was in a school in Wichita, Kansas called Friends University that the Quakers had started.
Oh, man, hardcore.
So, yeah, because I have
Great furniture, hard classes.
Hard furniture also.
I discovered I had all this Quaker ancestry like when I was around 18, and then eventually I went to that school. I didn't
Interesting.
finish there. I dropped out and did other things before I finished
That's
here
fascinating.
in Nashville at Trevecca. But
Nazarene College.
yeah. But I've always been interested in various spiritual writings from all kinds of different sources, whether it's Christian or Hindu or, the Upanishads or whatever else that I can read and feel like it's feeding my soul. So all that stuff is legit. I do tap into that world. Of course, we're all enlightened spirits in our own way, so I'm just accentuating that fact through the character. But I mean, Jocephus is not. I won't say he's misguided, but he definitely has a lot of work to do in the overall spiritual arc, especially to deal with that inward violence. He's one of those characters that, like the Bible says, some people take heaven by storm through violence. That's the kind of that's kind of the guy that Jocephus is.
He read that line and that was it. He just got stuck.
Man, there I am. But I mean, I try to have spiritual practices. I think some of the spiritual life, whatever you make that out to be, is missing in a lot of ways from our culture. And I think, when's the last time you heard anybody mention a spiritual life on any kind of news show or any, like everybody was tapping into the spiritual life today and it somehow made the world better,
Yeah.
like almost like the Dow Jones of
just anything that can possibly make us consider our actions.
as opposed to just being a vegan and an influencer and doing yoga.
Yeah.
See, I know nothing about any of that. So, But yeah, man, I mean, I try to tap into that world as much as I can personally. And that gives you a chance to add it to the character if you want to, or spin it in a darker way if you want to.
But what's crazy about it is you have like a native, there's something about it, because of that experience and because of your deep, pursuits that you've had for a long period of time. When you're doing this thing that's in all other ways seemingly an absurd stage and theater to be, like everything about it is some might even call it profane or whatever, but it's like, it's so ridiculous and also it's got this, you're coming from this firmament or like a basis that is fully believable. Like I say fully believable, but like it feels connected to something. That's why I was sort of asking you about all that, because nobody can just without that knowledge or that baseline just kind of walk into that and it come off the way that you're pulling that off.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about before we got started, like the subtleties and the details. There's just so many little things, linguistic things, gesture things.
Right.
And also like, I don't know how the fuck you do this, man, but like, and maybe it's part of the acting training or something, or just your film experience or whatever, but I've just noticed that you have a way of like meeting camera gaze and things in a way that's very intentional, and it has that quality that when people talk about, I'm not saying like Manson level shit or whatever, but like this, it's a charisma, right? Or but it's also, it's coming from not a formulaic or contrived place, but it's coming from an educated and intentional place.
Right.
The way that you play camera, the way that you play, like the way that you use your body and gesture, the way you use language, everything. I find it to be like infinitely interesting, irrespective of the NWA and all the exciting things and wrestling and what it means. Like there's something really interesting to me about the holistic or whatever sort of package or interrelational elements that are this embodiment of all the things that you've been doing. I just think it's really cool, man. I think it's really special. It's not something that anybody could do at all. It's uniquely you.
I think one thing I used is sort of I've used the character as a platform and I haven't done it in a while just because I've been busy, but to try to point people towards literature and the arts and things like I for a while I had the Jocephus book club and
that's amazing.
Jocephus music club and, and I'm talking about discreet music by Brian Eno on there and all these just stuff like that, because
tell me, you gotta tell me a couple of books that were in the book club.
I mean, like gosh, I gotta think now. I go blank.
If you can, there's no pressure.
Well, yeah, even like a guy like Meister Eckhart. I don't know if you know him or not,
sure.
but just some of his stuff is very.
He was a monk, right?
He was a Catholic. I don't know if he was actually a monk or
like
not. He's definitely a teacher.
Like that,
because Meister means master. Then they considered him a master teacher,
but a Catholic mystic.
Yeah,
right?
And he got excommunicated. Of course, later they brought him back in because they were like, "Oh, we were wrong about that." But yeah, just people like him, I'll recommend just the sayings, the sermons of Meister Eckhart.
That's fantastic.
And I know there's people out there that get into some of it because they'll write me about it.
Yeah.
And if I've done that a little bit, if I've exposed somebody to something that they wouldn't have come across.
Some like legit spiritual teachings. Yeah.
Spiritual or just aesthetic stuff. Yeah. If I've done that through wrestling, I feel like I've done a good thing.
That's amazing.
Well, yeah, even if you just encourage someone to take on some small nugget of contemplative, introspective thought and how you relate to the world and those around you, irrespective of dogma or path or origin or words or quality. Doesn't matter any of those things. Like just to be able to have some vehicle to project things through, to kind of just get people to because that's a feedback loop too. If you have a Jocephus book club, right? Because then it's an interactive thing on some level. You're kind of doing this thing together.
And I love the fact that it's like another fun way to sort of extrapolate this kind of like cult vibe. You know what I mean? It's like, are you in the book club? Are you in the music club? Join us. Join us. You know,
do you have tickets for September?
And it all has the vague sense that you're reprogramming people or something.
But it's just some of it. That too is like being an educator. You want, and not in a pretentious way, but you want people to be a part of something that meant something to you, so you share it with them, you know? And I mean, that's to me, like being a teacher, it's like, okay, let me share with you Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and like a lot of my students haven't even heard a symphony ever.
Right.
So I'm like, oh wow, here we go. I've given something to you.
Some of them haven't heard Bittersweet Symphony.
But the thing is, like, even if that's not their jam,
right,
or whatever, doesn't matter at all. You've shared something that you're passionate about, and at least you've been some example to them about, here's what it is to sort of like the pedagogical cycle or whatever is represented to them in some way. They go, okay, I'm curious about something, then I pursue it, then I strive to understand it, then I realize how much I don't actually know, then I bow in reverence to it, then I dabble in it, then I try to project my passion for it to others, and then recycle and go through something else. You know, like it's just for I think young people to see that, like, it's not
young people,
kids. Ultimately, I'm really talking about kids. You know, I think the kids get a lot of shit for like being really into something. You know, like I think that's still like a thing. Like where if you're just way deep into whatever you're into, you're gonna take some shit for it because that's how people identify you.
Right.
And that's the worst thing. You know, that kills curiosity and that freedom to just explore different things, as you've done with 25 different quests that you've been on.
Still going.
And it's all, but it all relates.
Right, it does. Of course it does.
There is a through line. We don't know what it is, but there is one.
Right.
Yeah.
My biographer will know.
I think you guys might feel this way as well, but one thing that I've noticed about people who are sort of like people who sort of tend to do like one thing, and of course that's a perfectly fine thing to do, and our friend Jeff Coffin is a perfect example of
Lame.
a fucking genius, fucking amazing like musician who's
Scared to do
kind of
something
does
else.
this thing.
There's
But like,
happy to train him in wrestling.
He's also an amazing photographer. He does all this shit,
Yeah,
but whatever.
that's true, he is, too.
He's
Yeah.
interested in wrestling. We can,
But people who basically sort of find that they're at their best when they sort of dedicate themselves to a task and they sort of stay on that path. And those people do that and they do it well, and it's a great formula for them. But I think often that formula gets projected out onto everyone. I know it got projected out onto me when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
It was the worst advice I ever got, and I recognized very quickly that as soon as I stopped doing that and let myself identify as things other than just this one thing and explore other ideas, suddenly not only did this thing, the first thing, not become diminished, but it actually became to life again.
Right.
And suddenly it was like, oh my God, basically for me, it's like I don't really have creative blocks, because if I don't have anything to write about art this week, I can work on my song. And if my song is almost done, then I can work on this photography project again.
Yeah.
And every time I come to the next thing that's fresh, I've got plenty of ideas, because I'm not just hammering this one thing and just bleeding, to the point where I got nothing left for it.
Yeah, because, it all informs everything else. It's like the circle of fifths. Everything, one key informs the other key somehow. It may take a few steps back to understand that, but it still informs it.
Yeah, and it's like the thing I'm expending energy in is actually refreshing me for the other stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially because typically anybody that oscillates between those various things, at least for me, I've noticed in a lot of other people, it's like, well, I do some things because this gives me like this immediate gratification, or this gives me, whereas what I normally do is this long, laborious thing. It takes me a year to make a film or whatever it is. Or like, I just, as much as I like to write, I need to like form things with my hand. Like it's just about sharpening
stuff,
other things, or satisfying other reward systems that kind of holistically put you all together to where you feel like, okay, I'm not just dying here.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like it's, we're talking about all these old philosophers and stuff, but it's like when I was growing up, I don't know where this idea got hammered into my head, but like I've always had this idea that like the whole idea of like being an educated person is like being a really well-rounded person who actually knows about many things and can do many things.
Yeah.
And to me, it was always like, because of that, I don't know why that got stuck in my head, but I've always just like looked at these people who are really good at a number of things. It's like, those are the people that I'm impressed by. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for some reason, I'm just trying to make a case for the fact that there's people like that, and don't tell those people not to be that way.
Yeah.
Because the do the one thing, I understand the logic behind what you think you're doing, but you're misunderstanding how people work.
Yeah. It is tricky though, because it's like, okay, if I want to be a musician and a mechanic, okay, so let's break that down for a second.
Yeah.
Like, you can play a lot of instruments, you can play a lot of different styles of music, or invent your own. Okay, so maybe experiment around enough with it to start figuring out where your natural niche is. Like, okay, really, I think I'm a jazz drummer. That's kind of what I'm magnetized towards. And at least you can get yourself sort of into that idiom. But then you're like, oh shit, am I really into just like bebop, or is it like fusion, or like these things that are kind of categorically different inside that thing, and then you got to figure out like that part, and then you kind of go down, but you still have to drill down through things to find niches to actually have any actual experience with something. And then on the mechanic side, you're like, I want to be the best mechanic ever. Nobody should discourage me from that. But if you don't have a focus, you're fucked.
Yeah, and
like,
it takes time to get that focus.
Like,
you got to put it in your
diesel
time.
engines versus not diesel engines, or
European vehicles.
Like all
only Celicas.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I would do. Is only
There's a bunch of Celica guys out there, and I'm going to be the mechanic.
Only 1980s Japanese cars, guys. That's all you need to focus on. No, but then you've got like the 60 muscle cars, and people that are in the Mopar stuff, or like whatever. It's just those are categorically different worlds that reside within this seemingly one world. And if you think you're going to do all those things, then you will fail miserably. So it's a weird paradox.
It is, yeah.
Because you should be open to being a really good mechanic, and a really good mechanic and jazz drummer. I think those things would work really well together. The sort of the problem solving and the improvisation and the perception and the sound and the tonalities. Like there'd be a million ways to sort of correlate that in an interesting way as a life experience. But if you don't have a niche, oh man, you're in trouble. So it's strange.
Yeah, on some level, yeah, you've got to like sort of find your spot, you know what I mean? But you can have many spots in many places. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, my father was sort of the archetype of who I am in a lot of ways. Like he was a great basketball player and actually had got recruited by Kentucky.
Whoa.
By Adolph Rupp back in the day, but he walked away from that to become a historian.
Hard to walk away from anybody named Adolf, by the way.
Exactly, but then he got bored doing history, and so he walked on. He went to Cumberland University for a while, and he walked on that team for basketball because he was so good, and just started as a walk-on.
Wow.
But he became he was eventually head of the Civil War department here at the Tennessee State Museum back in the day.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, but he's sort of the archetype, sort of who I am.
For like a well-rounded person.
Yeah,
right?
just he was a hell of an athlete, but he could also
super bright.
Kind of a scholar.
And he was like a Civil War reenactor before that was a thing, and like he worked at the Smithsonian as a kid and all this stuff.
When he was doing Civil War reenactments, was he picking up people and throwing over above his head and then throwing them on other people?
He was definitely a big dude, so he could have done that.
I will see your bayonet. I'll see your bayonet, and I will raise you.
Well, it just sounds like it could be dangerous if he was doing it before anybody else was. It's like were people calling the cops? I mean, like, how singular was this quest he was on?
That whole culture has its own set of terminology as well. I don't know if you've ever read Confederates in the Attic. That book is all about reenactment culture and stuff.
Oh, I love that stuff. I haven't read it, but I just love like subcultures are my jam.
It's a great book. And they like in the reenactment world, for the marks they call them farbs, which basically, like, my father used to sell fake relics to people because he knew how to make them look real,
like old bullets and stuff.
Bullets. He took a part of a tree once and put a bullet in it. And acted like he had found it, like at the in the fairgrounds area, because there was like a battle
just
over there.
Happened to be right over there.
It's just, oh wow, I found this bullet after so many years, and then he sold it to a farm. Or he could make arrowheads really well too, so he would constantly sell fake arrowheads.
So people who aren't in the South, like we've got all sorts of Civil War battlefields all over here. There was obviously native populations here before, so like this. I mean,
and
almost
a lot of people cling weirdly to the past.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's like there's tons of old stuff that's constantly being found in the ground, or construction projects that are stopped because suddenly we realize there's stuff here and it has to be archaeologically excavated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We haven't put our subway in yet. Wait till we do that. And limestone, it'll never happen.
It's a nightmare.
So I guess we should wrap it up here. I could go on for like 6 hours with this, man. But will you just come back? And also, can we use this as an opportunity to leverage you for an open invitation to come to Atlanta, September, and maybe you'll say hi to us or something?
I don't know if I'm going to say hi to you once I'm in the arena.
Oh man!
But I'll come back.
I just got scared. I don't know why.
And he goes into that Jocephus mode. It's like you can feel it when it changes.
Yeah, but he's looking at me. Look at the way he's looking at me right now. It's like
I've learned how to not blink for a long period of time too. That's what the best actors and salesmen do. They never blink if you watch.
Oh my god! Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, that's a thing. I had a job interview once where the guy was trying to do some of those kind of weird skills with me once.
Yeah.
And he would use like the pause technique, where he would just be like kind of like almost like that Larry David shit, where it's I just remember just being like, what? I just calling it.
Yeah.
I'm not good at awkward pauses, but anyway. So hey, tell people how they can find you, follow you, all the things. Give them the straight dirt.
On YouTube, my channel is called The Kingdom of Jocephus, as we mentioned earlier. On Twitter and Instagram, at Jocephus NWA. Those are the best places to follow me. I'm on Instagram more these days than anything.
Jocef. I mean, EPHUS.
Yeah, JOCEPHUS NWA. Don't put an S. I'm not Joseph Us. Okay, Jocephus.
Is there something scary there?
Maybe. Depends on if you're in the kingdom or not.
I saw a thing with Nick Diaz today where he posted a thing about his dog who's named Machiavelli, but he spells it like Makavelli. And someone commented on his Instagram post and said, it's spelled Machiavelli. And then he replied, shut up. That was like the best thing about my morning. I laughed my ass off when I saw that.
The most incidental geniuses of all time. We didn't even get into this. I really wanted to kind of like see what you know, how this, because MMA is really picking up on a lot of this stuff that you guys are sort of manufacturing, right, and producing.
Sure.
And it's to some people's dismay and to some people's delight. But anyway, maybe that's for the next time. But hey man, really, thanks so much for coming.
Man, it's great talking to you.
Please let's do it again. And after your first, after you guys break open this studio vibe, I'd love to have you back and see how that all went.
Absolutely. Just don't expect me to say hi to you in Atlanta.
Unbelievable.
I feel like he's gonna beat me up again.
It's gonna happen.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Appreciate it, and we're out. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When we were trying to get this podcast off the ground, we had a lot of questions. How do we record a podcast? How do we get the show into all the apps people like to use to listen to a podcast? How do we make money from podcasting? The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. So, with the Art Fight podcast, we thought this would be a great tool to use. We actually started off with another tool that we will leave unnamed. And it was, you had to pay every month, and it wasn't as good as this. So, it wasn't really hard for us to make the switch. We love it. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. Anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. Can't wait to hear what you come up with, and make sure you shout us out. Thanks.
Okay guys, I love the Art Fight podcast, and I listen to every episode even though I am a robot trying to sound like an actual person. I know it takes a lot to keep the podcast going. How can I help?
Go to anchor.fm/artfightpodcast. Click on the button, the big old button that says support this podcast. And once you get there, you'll have 3 options. You can just choose the lowest level. You're going to pledge 99 cents a month to our production and help us out. Again, anchor.fm/artfightpodcast. Click on support this podcast. All right. Thanks, everyone.